If you look at the Vegas line, it might as well be an Alabama-Kentucky game from just pick the year, but it's the SEC championship game, and it's a 15-point line between Alabama taking on Missouri in Atlanta coming up this Saturday. We bring in Ben George of Tied at 99.1 to break it down for us. Ben, thanks so much for joining us, as always.
Yeah, Mark, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so it's a bit of a letdown when you consider the opponents of previous weeks. Number one, Mississippi State, the Iron Bowl, which is always the pinnacle of the season, and now it's a Missouri team that you would seed possibly in that 5th or 6th place if you combine the entire SEC into one conference, but still it's the championship game. So how is the level of excitement for the typical Alabama fan at this point?
I think it's pretty high, but it's not an Alabama-Florida matchup, or even I think most Alabama fans were hoping for an Alabama-Georgia matchup as far as excitement is concerned. Now, the fans that wanted the easier path to the playoffs would have picked this matchup, no question. But it's still an SEC championship, Mark, and no matter how you get there, whether you go through Missouri's schedule or Alabama's schedule, you're still happy to be there. It's still an honor to be in this game. It's still one of the biggest games of the year, every year, and this is no different. So Alabama fans are excited. It's not the level of the past necessarily, but it's still a big game.
Yeah, that Georgia game in 2012 is just about as good as it gets. A couple of heavyweights going at it, possibly the two best teams in the country at the time. We probably don't have that type of scenario here. What do you make of the Iron Bowl? Because on the plus side, it's throwing the ball all over the field, Amari Cooper being a special player once again on the big stage. The defense stopped the running game of Auburn, which is their bread and butter. On the negative side, of course, Nick Marshall had his way with the Alabama secondary, and that was pretty much what, of course, kept Auburn in the game and with a 12-point lead sometime in the second half. So your take on the Iron Bowl?
There's some bad to it, but I think a win in that game is a big win, no matter what. And the way they came from behind and fought back, Blake Sims deserves all the success he's earned this year. I mean, he's laid it on the line week in, week out. To be essentially one drive away from being pulled out of that game for Jay Coker, and he responded as good as anybody ever could. I mean, it doesn't matter the quarterback. You wouldn't find a better second half than that after that third interception. But you do have some concerns on the secondary. I mean, that's been my biggest concern all year. When I picked A&M to beat Alabama, I'll bring up that prediction. It was awful. But this is the kind of thing that I was thinking about, is the secondary has had a lot of trouble, and against good receivers, it's not a good matchup. You have to be concerned. Now, they were lights out a couple of times, and they've been pretty good this year. But you have to be concerned with that Auburn game. That they showed some weaknesses in that, but they found a way to win, and they're winning with great offense right now. And I think that bodes well for them moving forward, because they're going to play some in the playoffs. Should they get there, they're going to probably play some pretty good offensive teams, and they can get in a shootout with them, which might not have been the case 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, 44 points is alarming, and whatever the yardage total was for the Auburn Tigers, at the same time, we have to keep reminding people that this is not college football from 5 years ago or before that. It's just a different game, and it's the expectations of what a defense can limit any dynamic offense to has to be changed in this day and age. If you're holding these teams down to 28, 30, 31 points, it's sometimes a monumental defensive effort that gets that done. Yeah, they did get torn up to shreds at times, but when the game was decided in the fourth quarter, they made the stops against Nick Marshall and company. So do they get back to the running game wholeheartedly this week?
I think they probably do. I mean, I think Amari Cooper, he's still going to get his touches. I expect him to have another big game. He had the big game a couple of years ago against Georgia, had that big catch to win that game in the SEC championship from A.J. McCarron. And I expect that to be the case again. He'll get his targets. But I do think Alabama will try to pound the ball out. We saw the running game look a little better last week against Auburn, and I think they'll continue that. And Missouri, if they've been susceptible somewhere, it's the running game. They have a good defensive front, but a lot of times when you get that defensive front, the best way to go at them is directly at them, head on. And I think Alabama's going to try to do that with Yeldon and Henry, and then even Tyron Jones, who's starting to come on as of late as that third running back. He's been pretty explosive when he's had his opportunity. So I think they do go after that. I mean, they're going to – Lane Kiffin won't veer away from his offense too much. But I think in this game that they might try to run it a little bit more than they have.
And that Missouri front last year was probably even better because they had Michael Sam, they had Tony Ely, a couple high draft picks. Well, Sam not so much a high draft pick, but the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Ely a high draft pick for the NFL, and they had Golden and Shane Ray at the time. Shane Ray may turn out to be the SEC Defensive Player of the Year this year. We'll see. What do you make of these sideline confrontations? Would be too strong a word, but we see some interaction at times that's a bit comical between Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban. And I think a lot of the announcers and analysts surmise that it's Kiffin wanting to throw the ball all over the field and Saban saying, hey, I want us to get back down to Bama basic football.
I think it's two strong personalities, button heads. Lane, I'm sure Lane wants to do it his way, and Nick's got his way. I mean, we know that. I don't make much of it. I think it's healthy when things are going well. I mean, when you're moving the ball like that, I think you can let them do whatever they want to. Now, if you look at the Saints and they're constantly arguing on the sideline, Peyton and Ryan going back and forth while they're losing ball games, I think you're concerned at that point. But I think with this, it's fun. And look, Alabama fans have embraced Kiffin now. I mean, his antics they're tough when they're happening somewhere else, but when he's on the sideline putting up the touchdown sign, when Amari Cooper is 10 yards into a 60-yard touchdown play, it's fun to see when things are going right. But I don't make too much out of it. I think Lane probably would like to do a few more things with the offense, but I think he's gotten a long leash and a lot of freedom this year to do what he wants to do, and it's paid off. I mean, this offense has been as good as ever at Alabama in the history of the school.
Yeah, because an overriding storyline for this guy's career is that he gains all these really good jobs at a young age. He's got a good-looking wife. He says a lot of stupid things, rubs people the wrong way. He's smug. He's aloof. He's this and that. But he has to have some football acumen for Nick Saban to bring him into the fold. And he obviously, I think we're seeing it this season, that he really knows offensive football.
Yeah, I think there's no question. He's whether you want to debate his career path and whether it's been justified, that's a different story. But he can coach offense, and I think we might look back on this. I mean, Alabama still has 3 games to go in order to win another championship. But should they get through that, I mean, you can look back at this hire and say it could be Nick Saban's best hire he's ever made. I mean, at this point, it's shaping out to be, and nobody. I mean, there was no gray area when he was hired. You either hated the hire or you loved it, thought it was going to be very good for this team. And I was more on the hated it side, I guess. But he came in and he did what he was hired to do, and that was turn the offense around. And what I really like about him is he makes it simple for him, for Blake Sims. He gets the ball to his playmakers. People keep saying, well, Blake Sims should spread the ball out more. Well, Amari Cooper is putting up the best season in the country at wide receiver. Okay, so he's doing what he needs to do. He wouldn't have as many yards in another system, and if the quarterback was spreading around, obviously his totals would drop off a large amount. So he makes it simple. He gets the ball to his playmakers, and he scores points. It's fun to watch, and I think he's probably a year away from earning another head coaching position. Let's be honest.
Okay, the Missouri chance here. And I'm going to kind of contradict myself, but what I saw last year out of Missouri was that they had Dorial Green Beckham, they had LaDainian Washington, who's somewhere on an NFL roster. They were big guys that could, body up a defensive back, frame it up, high point the football, just NFL-type bodies and talent. We saw Sammy Coates and Duke Williams last week, to a lesser extent. Really get after it in the passing game, and Nick Marshall's not going to be, I think he's really improved, but he's not going to be confused with Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, and he carved up the Alabama secondary. Missouri doesn't have those 2 guys that they had last year. They've got capable wide receivers. They don't really have elite wide receivers. Matty Mauk can sling it, and when he's hot, he's really good. He's a low percentage passer because he goes for the chunk yardage, but if we step aside from special teams, which is another Missouri trademark, at least this season, that's that's the hope for Mizzou, is that Matty Mock can sling it all over the field, but I don't think they've got those guys to take advantage of the Alabama secondary like Auburn did last week.
No, they don't have as many guys. Bud Sasser's a really good receiver. He's had good numbers, put up good numbers this year. Had some big catches last week in that Arkansas comeback to get him in this game. But I think it ultimately does come down to Matty Mock. I mean, he's been a guy that, there were high hopes on him as a quarterback coming into this year after what he did a year ago, and it hadn't really been that pretty. I mean, he had 2 300-yard games against Indiana, a game they lost, and against Toledo. So he threw those out the window. He had a stretch in the middle of the season where he was just awful. 132 yards against South Carolina, 97 against Georgia, 20 yards passing against Florida, 141 against Vanderbilt. Awful team. But he's come back. His last 3 weeks have been solid. He's starting to get a little more confidence back. But, this is going to be probably the toughest defense he's faced this year. But, they're similar to what Arkansas tries to do, and he did well with that. So, I don't expect him to have a great game, but, Mark, how many times have we seen a quarterback line up against Alabama and play lights out? I mean, it's been, 6 days since that happened last? I mean, Nick Marshall's been garbage for most of this year. Pat, I don't know, a Heisman-winning quarterback last week. I mean, he was on the money, on point, all game. So will that happen again this week? And will Alabama have to put up defend another outstanding performance? Maybe. But I'd lean towards Matty Mock probably being a little off in this game, and Alabama trying to get pressure on him. But it is going to come down to him, I think.
It's off topic, but for a second, if you want to see one of the strangest box scores you'll ever see, you look at the Missouri-Florida game, because you mentioned Matty Mock throwing for 20 yards because he didn't have to throw it. They won 44-10. They had 100 yards of offense because they had pick six, fumble return, punt return, something else crazy. And Florida, as they typically do, gave the game away, and they only gave up 100 yards of offense, but they got blown out by 30 points. What do you make of Missouri coming into the SEC in 3 years, winning it twice after the rough first year? Again, it's the East, but they're lined up against Georgia, Florida, some high money, resource, recruiting bases with those programs, and they've won the East. They're 14-2 the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's surprising, Mark. I mean, there's nobody saw this coming. Nobody thought A&M and Missouri would take away and Johnny Manziel, so it made the transition a lot smoother. Missouri, on the other hand, I mean, they've had a good defense. They've really played SEC football to get here. They had really good defense and a solid offense. Their first year wasn't that good. They were 2-6 the first year coming in. But the last 2 years have been really good. But I do think a lot of that has to do with their schedule. They have benefited. I mean, we talk about it, but it's true. I mean, they haven't beat a team this year in the conference with the SEC winning record. And I guess in the West, they play the 2 worst teams, A&M and Arkansas. Now, Arkansas was pretty good. They were one of the better teams in the second half of that season. And A&M was really good at times and really awful at others, but they still benefited from playing the 2 worst teams on that side. So, it's been a really down year for the East. I think this year, especially, it's been down. But you know what? They can ride this a little bit, and I think it should help them recruit, and it should help them kind of stay at that level a little bit. I mean, you got to think they have a good chance to stay South Carolina spot as that number 3 team right there with Tennessee, right behind Florida and Georgia when everybody's playing well. But, they've benefited early on from a pretty nice schedule.
Yeah, it turned out to be a good ad for the SEC, a program that could come in and, I wouldn't expect 2 division championships out of every 3 years going forward. But, they should be able to go to bowl games consistently and compete for division championships at times. So let's play some scenario games out here, because if everybody holds serve, then that's going to be a mess, and there's going to be decisions made by the College Football Committee between Baylor, TCU, and Ohio State as it shapes up. We start to get some upsets, and it plays us out a certain way. And of course, those three teams are hoping for upsets elsewhere, and then it could be somewhat uniform and simplified for the committee. Let's play Armageddon here. If everybody loses that has one loss currently, then what you have, because it's set up that you got a bunch of two-loss teams playing a bunch of one-loss teams in championship games, it would just be hilarious for me in particular, who loves to trash the system, that all the two-losses teams beat the one-loss teams, and then we got a glut of two-loss teams all over the place. Then I don't know what they do. I would assume that, they would go to conference championships, I would hope, in most cases. Not necessarily this case, and that would be my argument that Missouri, and I know most people are against me here, should get the nod over Alabama because they both have two losses. Missouri beat them head-to-head, number one team in the country, won the SEC championship. And again, I know that Bama trashed A&M 59-0, but in total, the Missouri outcomes against the three like opponents, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Arkansas, aren't that much different than Alabama's. They won those three games as Alabama did, and were fairly comparable against Arkansas and Tennessee.
It'd be tough. I mean, I'm looking at the rankings and trying to go through the scenarios because it is interesting. And we've never gotten to that point, the Armageddon scenario. But you got to think it's got to happen at some point, right? I mean, I think the odds say it will happen at some point. Whether this is the year or not, I don't know. But could they jump a Georgia Tech team or even a Kansas State team? That if those are the two teams that win this week, Missouri have to get over them. I think it'd be tough for Missouri to make the jump. But I'm with you. I mean, how can you leave an SEC champion out? They'd probably have the worst loss of any of those teams at the top, and that's what everybody would point to. But it'd be tough to leave an SEC team out, and a champion out. Mark, it's not a situation I'd want to be in. And I know a lot of Alabama fans wouldn't be excited about getting into the playoff with the two losses. I know you'd be, eventually you'd get over it and accept the fact that you're playing in the semifinal, but it wouldn't be the way you want to enter. But, I mean, you brought it up, and I hadn't thought about it. Alabama could lose, and with two other teams losing, they could still sit in that top four. You got to imagine that, a Michigan State isn't going to jump in Alabama, right?
No, they play in the SEC, and they made the championship game. Michigan State didn't even get to the championship game of a lesser conference.
Yep. My question is if Florida State loses and Alabama loses. I mean, everybody wants to knock Florida State, but does Florida State stay in with one loss? Do they give them the benefit of the doubt? I don't know, Mark. It'd be a fun thing to watch. If it happened. I don't want Alabama to lose, obviously, but if it happened, it'd be interesting to see how the selection committee plays it.
Yeah, we could talk with different scenarios forever because there's there. But you bring up Georgia Tech and Missouri. Now, to me, let's say they lose in comparable fashion. So there are no blowouts here. Georgia Tech beats Florida State by a field goal. Mizzou beats Alabama by a field goal. The SEC champion against Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech didn't play anybody. Well, they played Georgia, of course, out of conference. So, yeah, you know one thing, Ben, is that if Missouri somehow squeaks into football playoffs, that I may mention that Indiana game once or twice between now and the college football playoffs. I may make mention of that once or twice.
I just don't know how it would be possible for them to get up there from 16. I can't fathom it. Mainly because you would need. I mean, they have like three teams ahead of them that won games this weekend, and that'd be tough to give them that bump.
But remember, it's not based on look at last week rankings, and now we're going to project. They start over.
Yeah, I know. I just can't see it though.
And that wins an SEC championship over the number one team.
Yeah. Hey, I'm an SEC defender, Mark, and I just can't see it.
Yeah, I just think it would be interesting. Well, and again, of course, I think Armageddon comes every year. I think it's screwed up every year. So you're talking to the grown guy when you bring that up.
Well, worst case scenario, I guess I should say.
Yeah, or best case scenario.
Yeah, how you look at it.
Arizona, Oregon, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Alabama, Missouri, Georgia Tech, Kansas State all have 2 losses. Baylor, I guess we can't ask for TCU to lose to Iowa State. That might be pushing it just a tad.
That's pushing it.
But and you talk about, well, what I was going to mention when you mentioned Florida State losing and also Alabama is that, yeah, Florida State only has the 1 loss and they got the better record, but they start off in a similar, or in a 3 slots lower than Alabama. And if they lose to similar opponents, I consider Missouri and Georgia Tech on pretty much the same line. I know they're like 11 versus 16 or whatever it is. But that would be a similar loss. So anyway, we could drag this on forever with these scenarios. But look at Arizona. For the longest time, I heard about how Arizona, even though they beat Oregon and had the same record, they were ranked like 10 spots behind them forever. And I kept hearing, well, it's Arizona. They're going to lose anyway. They're really not that good. Well, so it turned out that they defeated Arizona State and UCLA and some pretty good teams. Utah. Those are like 3 consecutive wins, and then they get to the Pac-12 championship game, and who knows now?
Yeah, they got a chance. There's a number of teams that still have a chance, and that's what's good about the playoff is, we'll only be talking about 4 or 5 teams, but you can talk about 8 to 10 that have a chance to make this top 4, depending on how it breaks.
All right, Ben George tied at 99-1, joining us to break down the SEC championship game. Ben, enjoy the game, and as always, we appreciate the time.
Yeah, Mark, enjoyed it.